God is not loyal to us. Let me take a second and explain that. Loyalty means subservience. And yes, Jesus did lower himself to the place of a servant, but we didn't have authority over him. We couldn't change him. God has his own measurements and definitions for good and evil, for right and wrong, and justice and sin. And he does not change for us, and he does not change because of us. And I want us to take a second and get a bird's eye view on our lives and ask yourself, if we truly believe that God is the standard and the measurement for right and wrong and good and evil, why is it that sometimes we try to look within ourselves to find right and wrong or good and evil and just try to, and maybe even in some standards, choose wickedness and then try to dress it up as righteousness? Pastor Kelly was mentioning vacation, and I actually just got off of vacation like not that long ago, like I think a week and a half or so. And you may not have even noticed I was gone, and that's because we have some amazing volunteers. And I just want to point out just two specifically that went above and beyond and did everything they could to help make sure the Sunday ran smoothly. Can you all just give a round of applause for Freddie and Trinity and all of the amazing things they did? Super reliable, always helpful, and always serving. You guys have awesome and very exemplary hearts. So this vacation I was telling you about, it was awesome. See, it's probably the easiest vacation that I ever went out to because we flew. See, Jen and I went out to New York to visit her family. It was great. It was so relaxing. I mentioned last week or so that the weather was amazing. I had to wear a hoodie every day, and that is my favorite kind of weather. It was just amazing, super relaxing. And what I didn't realize at that moment is it was like a rubber band slowly coming to tension. I was relaxed, it was a great time, and then we had to go home, but going home wasn't the issue. See, what happened is we got to TSA, and our flight was at 6 a.m., which means we have to get to the airport at 4 a.m. And so we're there at TSA at 4 a.m., first ones in line, just when they open up, and that is when all the tension snapped back to us like a sucker punch. See, we got there, and we're the first ones in line. They open it up, and Jenna walks up with her stuff, and she's like, hey, for context, we flew there, no problem. It was the easiest, no hassle, complications at all. And this isn't anything against TSA. They were doing their job. But here's the thing. So Jenna walks up to the lady who just opened up the stand, and she says, here's my ticket, and here's my ID. But here's the thing. My last name doesn't match on my ID as she's still giving this explanation to stuff, the lady cuts her off and goes, ID and ticket have to match. Jenna's like, okay, well I have this, and we're trying to explain to her how we got here in the first place, and she's like, ID and ticket have to match. You're gonna have to go. And we're like, go? And she's like, you're gonna have to go. You have to step out of line. And we're like, what? Kind of paralyzed and in disbelief of what do you mean step out of line? Where are we gonna go? She's like, you just gotta step out of line. So we step out of line and we're like, what are we gonna do? Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And so we run back to American Airlines where we checked our bags and we're trying to tell them the explanation, and they're like, we can't change your ticket name. You can't fly in as one person and leave as another person. We can't change your ticket name. And so we're like, okay. And she's like, okay, hold on. Let me see if I can explain the situation to them. So she takes us up there and she tries to, on our behalf, kind of help us along. And then finally, the lady at TSA is like, let me call my supervisor. Supervisor comes out, and man, we just start to go down this list right here. He asked the same thing. No, we don't have any IDs matching ticket and last name. I bought the tickets and I wasn't thinking, so I put Shaffer, but her IDs have her maiden name on it. And so we're kind of freaking out, and he's going down this list. Do you have any IDs or anything that match it? You can't change the name of the ticket. And we're like, we have a marriage certificate. That's how we got here. We brought it, called American Airlines, and they said it would be okay. And so we pull out the marriage certificate and hand it to him. He flips it open and looks at it and goes, is this a copy? And we're like, yeah, you can't use copies. And I'm like, that's they didn't tell us that. And here's the thing, and I tell them, like, we flew here with that. Like, they let us through in Oklahoma with that. He goes, well, they shouldn't have let you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like running through all these scenarios in my mind. I'm like, are we gonna have to go back into New York and get her a New York ID? Am I gonna have to fly back to Oklahoma and get an ID in her stead and mail it back to her, and she's gonna have to finally fly on her own? I'm running through all these nightmare scenarios in my mind, freaking out, being like, how in the world can we get through this? And it felt like in that moment that it was us versus TSA, that it was like everything that they wanted, we didn't have, and everything that we had, they didn't want. It was the worst conflict that gave us all of this stress and worry. And eventually, thank goodness, like I said, TSA were doing their job. They worked on our behalf and eventually helped us out. Had a very long phone call that lasted 30 minutes where he was on the phone with, I think, some other higher up. And it was a bunch of, no, she doesn't have that. Yeah, I know, I told him. And like, oh my gosh, it was so stressful. And so finally we get to the gate just like 40 to 50 minutes before our plane boards. And I know that sounds like a lot of time, but whenever you're flying home and like everything is relying on this one flight, that's a lot of money, banking on 40 to 50 minutes. And so super stressed out, we sat down in the terminal, and lo and behold, they start calling people back to TSA from their gate. So like people, like they're starting to say, group 2, you can board now. And they're like, Sam Willinson, can you please come to the TSA checkpoint? And me and Jen are like, they're not gonna call you back, are they? And we're like, oh my gosh. And they're calling people back, like people are going up to board and then having to turn around and go back to TSA. And it's just stress, man. So at that moment, of course they helped us out, but it felt like at that terminal that it was us versus TSA, that it was us versus them. And so today, this has to do with biblical stuff. We're going to be going into Joshua 5, verses 13 through 14, where we can maybe perceive this as a Joshua versus Jericho thing. So, while you're turning to Joshua 5, 13 through 14, I want to give you just a little bit of a recap, just to help you get a framework in your mind. See, in Joshua 1, Joshua became the leader of the Israelites, and he basically just kind of reaffirms everything that Moses has been saying, and that's, we should follow God and listen to his commandments. And in Joshua 2, Joshua sends out the spies, just like Moses did. But the difference is all the spies come back with good news, and that the people of Canaan are terrified of the Israelites because of the things they've heard that God is doing. In Joshua 3 and 4, if you'll remember last week, they crossed the Jordan River. If you guys remember, test to testimony. They left the stones behind. And finally, in Joshua 5, God calls Joshua to circumcise all the men of Israel, to set them apart and make them unique, and to prepare them for Jericho, the first city. So reading all of that, or remembering all that rather, it sounds like a bunch of Joshua did this, Joshua did that, Joshua this, etc., etc. And we can go into Joshua 5 thinking that this is a Joshua versus Jericho circumstance. But I want to tell you, I don't think that is how we should be looking at it. As a matter of fact, I don't think that that's the main focus at all. So I want to tell you what I think it really is about, but let's read Joshua 5 first, right here. When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. See, I believe the commander's words here give us a new perspective and framework to think about this Joshua versus Jericho situation. I don't think that it is the Israelites versus the Canaanites following this area. I believe that it is God versus wickedness. I believe that is the perspective that we are meant to have. And to support this, I actually want to fast forward to the future a little bit. See, here's the thing. God doesn't choose sides, but rather he is his own side. And I'm going to read you a verse real quick, and I think it's going to give us a better understanding of this God versus wickedness perspective. So in Isaiah 10, 5 through 7, and then I'm going to skip to 12, here's what's going on in Isaiah. See, eventually the Israelites moved into Israel, and they founded their nation, and they split up into tribes, and they had a great kingdom. And what I mean by great is size. See, here's the thing. Israel had an issue with wickedness and idolatry. They would turn away from God constantly. And, there's some kings that are good and some kings that are bad, but here's the catch. Even the ones that we label as good kings still faltered and stumbled in their ways, and in one way or another turned away from God. And so here you basically have this long lineage and history of wickedness and turning away from God in Israel. And that's whenever the prophet Isaiah shows up on the scene. And he says this to, I think it was the king Hezekiah. It was one of the kings of Israel. And he says this to the king: "What sorrow awaits Assyria, the rod of my anger? I will use it as a club to express my anger. I am sending Assyria against a godless nation, Israel, against a people with whom I am angry. Assyria will plunder them, trampling them like dirt beneath its feet. But the king of Assyria will not understand that he is my tool. His mind does not work that way." And jumping to verse 12, after the Lord has used the king of Assyria to accomplish his purposes on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, he will turn against the king of Assyria and punish him, for he is proud and arrogant. So I think this gives us a whole new perspective. See, is this an Israel versus Assyria issue? No. This is a God versus wickedness, both in Israel and Assyria. God was punishing the wickedness in Israel and then was turning around and punishing Assyria, who was also wicked in their own hearts. And I think this gives us a better understanding of who God is. So let's rewind it back to Joshua's time now that we understand that God, he has a chosen people, but he doesn't necessarily play favorites. He is a righteous God. He is a just God, and he punishes wickedness. And so you might wonder, okay, Eli, so if the Assyrians were wicked and the Israelites were wicked, then what did these people in Canaan do? Specifically, what did the people in Jericho do? What is God punishing them for? We don't see it in the Bible. But here's the thing. We do find it in the Bible, but we have to read between the lines. See, the people of Canaan were guilty of a number of wicked things, and I'll tell you a couple of them. If you guys remember the story of Elijah, the God that a lot of people were serving, God with the lowercase g, was Baal, or if you want to be a nerd, it's Baal. I don't mean to say nerds like in a derogatory term. I'm just saying like you know it. Smart nerd that way, not mean nerd. So Baal, I'm just going to say that just so I don't like stutter over my words saying Baal. So Baal, he was seen as the lowercase g God of many things. He was the God of storms. He was the God of the seas. They even believed that he had conquered death, and he did it repeatedly every season because that's what spring was to them. But most importantly, what they saw and what they thought is that Baal was the god of fertility. See, fertility was a crucial thing to civilization, but instead of turning and trusting in God, people would turn and trust in idols and deities and false gods. And so what they would do for Baal to bless them is they would sacrifice bulls, sheep, pigs, and all these things to gain his favor for their own fertility and prosperity. You might say, well, that's not terrible. I mean, it's like, obviously you shouldn't be doing that to him, but it's not like wicked necessarily, I don't think. Here's the thing. In times of great crisis, the people that worshiped Baal would sacrifice their firstborn in order to gain special personal prosperity over their family. See, this is a twisted understanding of what we actually see God wanting later on. See, God wants us to set apart our first, wants us to sanctify and set it apart and say, God, this is yours. But instead, what these people were doing is they were killing their firstborns in order to gain the attention of their false god. And it even says in the Bible that the Lord sees this as detestable. Now let me tell you about another goddess, and specifically one they were worshiping that I think we can connect some more dots with, and that is Asherah. This was a goddess, lowercase g, of fertility that they worshiped. And that huge long list in everyone's favorite book, Leviticus 18, where it's a long list of who you shan't have sexual relations with, you can thank Asherah and Asherah worship for that long list. Because here's the thing about that. See, Asherah was seen as the mother of Baal, but was also disgustingly the mistress of Baal. And they believed by engaging in ritual prostitution that they would be able to basically coax them to get together, and that would bring prosperity for the land. It was a terribly disgusting thing. And maybe where we found the job titles that say, for instance, I'm not saying this is certain, but helps give us an idea of maybe that's why there's job titles such as Rahab for prostitution. So they were doing terribly sexually immoral things, and I've only listed 2 of the deities that they were believing that would bring them prosperity, and I'm not going to go down anymore. I think we understand now. So let's move on. So I told you all these things. Obviously, this isn't a lesson on false gods, but I told you this for 2 reasons. The first one is for apologetics, which means the defense of the faith. You may have an atheist or a new believer read through this part of Joshua and be like, man, God is so wicked. He did genocide. He killed so many people. He did all these things just so his chosen people could have their choice land. And that's not it at all. Whenever we come to understand the wickedness that was in the heart of these Canaanites, God is just. God is fair. He punishes all that have wickedness in their heart. And Israel is no difference. We just read Assyria. God used Assyria to punish Israel's wickedness. So that first part is just so we are aware and knowledgeable the Canaanites were in a great amount of wickedness. And the second reason I told you this is to help shift our perspective to this concept of God versus wickedness, because I believe that it can majorly impact how we go about our lives and our perspective on 3 major things. And I believe the first one is God's character, who God is. The second is how we interact with those around us. And lastly is ourselves. So let's talk about God first and understanding this concept of God versus wickedness. What does this mean for our understanding of God? God is not loyal to us. Let me take a second and explain that. Loyalty means subservience. And yes, Jesus did lower himself to the place of a servant, but we didn't have authority over him. We couldn't change him. That he was still Lord and Master, but he would take an opportunity to serve his disciples. Think of Jesus washing their feet, the most humbling thing that he could possibly do for them. He was never their student, but he did serve them. So what does this mean for us? Well, this means that God has his own measurements and definitions for good and evil, for right and wrong, and justice and sin. And he does not change for us, and he does not change because of us. As a matter of fact, God's definitions and standards have been set since the beginning of all things and have been perfect from the beginning of all things. And you might pause and think for a second, all right, Eli, this is some pretty good but basic God 101 stuff right here. So why are you telling us this? Because I already get this. And I want us to take a second and get a bird's eye view on our lives and ask yourself, if we truly believe that God is the standard and the measurement for right and wrong and good and evil, why is it that sometimes we try to look within ourselves to find right and wrong or good and evil and just try to, and maybe even in some standards, choose wickedness and then try to dress it up as righteousness? That happens all the time in this world. And so I want to tell you this. Whenever I always get extremely nervous whenever I'm speaking on something that the Bible doesn't explicitly say. And so I had the wonderful and terrible opportunity to speak on dating to the youth. See, here's the thing about dating. Dating is a relatively new concept, but the truths that God has and wisdom that God has for relationships doesn't change and it still applies. So while like I can point to things in the Bible that are like, God said the two shall become one. So there's one right there, exclusivity and purity. And it also says in the New Testament that you shall not defile the wedding bed or the marriage bed, however they say it. So we get a couple ideas that help guide us along, but there's nothing like, what verse do I point to in the Bible that tells a student that they shouldn't just date any dingus with a cross necklace around their neck? It's not there. Maybe you can, anyways, I'm joking. But here's the thing, is that oftentimes it can be difficult to find out what God says or God's wisdom is about things. And I think that we need to be really careful in those moments. And I think we always need to try to take a step back, maybe take a breather, and even sometimes admit, I don't know. Because it is better to say, I don't know, than to try to go off and make our own definitions of right and wrong. So we need to take serious every opportunity that we get to speak. And I have actually a verse for that. That is in the Bible. So I want to quote Matthew 12, 35 through 37 right here. And it says this, a good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. And you may not think it or know it, but no word you ever say falls flat. You guys know that, I don't even know what they call it, what the poetic word, whatever, but you guys know the saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't really make a sound. That doesn't apply to our words. Because here's the thing, when we least expect people to be listening, they are. And even if no person is listening, God is always listening. So, before we move on to the next section, let me say this. Times change and cultures shift, but God remains the same. We do not define him, he defines us. So, let's talk more about this us right here. I love recently how we've brought up the verse a couple times out of Ephesians 6:12. And I love it because I think it embodies this whole concept of God versus wickedness, not or us versus them, or their side versus their side. So let's read this out of Ephesians 6. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Man, I might as well just slap a name tag on myself that just says nerd, because I want to talk about the Greek real quick. So in this original Greek, some of the root words, there's a little bit of a different understanding that we can get here. See, in this translation, it doesn't use the word principalities that some of your translations may use. And, growing up, I always said the word principalities when remembering this Bible verse, but I didn't really know what a principality was. I thought like maybe it was a kingdom or something. So I went into the original root Greek to figure out what this means. And I think it shocked me quite a bit, because whenever you look at it, it says a principality is a beginning or an origin, the person or thing that commences something, or that by which anything begins to be. And later, farther down the line, to give us more context, where it says mighty powers in this dark world, other translations, and closer to the original Greek, it says the rulers of darkness. So what is this darkness? Does it just mean evil? Not necessarily. This word darkness actually means of darkened eyesight or blindness. And they actually use as a metaphor for someone who is ignorant, respecting divine things and human duties, and is accompanying ungodliness or immorality. So what is all that fancy talk? Let's smash it together. So basically what we have here is our enemies are actually the root, the beginning, and the origin of ignorance against God and immorality and ungodliness. The ones that start it, the ones that begin it, not the ones who are caught in it or participating in it, but rather the ones who began it. And the rest of that verse tells us what? That those are the enemies in the unseen places. the evil spirits in the heavenly places. Our enemies are not against people. Our enemies are against the things affecting people. And so why is this important to what we read? See, they are the root of insecurity. They are the root that motivates people to choose their own definition of right and wrong, that fear. I can think back to Genesis. I always love referring back to the Garden of Eden because I think we understand a lot more about human nature. That's what happened with Adam and Eve, is they had that root, that beginning of mistrust with God, or that desire for more wisdom, power, whatever it may be was going on in their head, but there was a root for that. And that was our enemy. So we don't call Adam and Eve our enemies because they've caused this, or if you want to say they've caused this, but rather it is the tempter, the one who led them to it. And we still see tempting and all sorts of false promises given to people, and we see that today with some of the distorted and misplaced social ideals and social truths. I say truths because they're trying to define their own truth, their own right and wrong, their own good and evil, but we can't do that. And when they try to follow along with these little whispers in their ear or these little feelings upon their heart, that is temptation and brokenness leading them, we come along with broken and completely dysfunctional and ungodly definitions for good and evil. These people have fallen for lies and tricks of the enemy, and thus our perspective shouldn't be that they are the enemy, but rather they are our mission. They are the ones who need hope. They are the ones who need truth. And even if they turn against us, that still does not make them the enemy. As a matter of fact, Jesus said that we should be praying for them, that we should be serving them, and that we should be loving them in hopes to reveal to them God's truth, a truth that surpasses all earthly understanding. And it's really easy, and I'm with you 100% on this. It's really easy to get caught up in frustration. It's really easy to get caught up with a, how do you not understand this? And a disbelief at what they're saying, what's coming out of their mouths. It's really easy to get caught up in that. But we need to take a big step back, take a breath, and pray that God gives us patience and discernment and wisdom in that moment so that we can speak truth to them without hate also coming out of our mouths. Because as it says, as Paul says in the Bible, hate and love cannot come from the same source. It cannot. We must guard our hearts against this. So let me take a brief pause. Let's reel it back into this. See, I love my social media feed has like some therapists and some counselors on it because I love getting practical advice and being able to see, does this align with God's wisdom? And then if it does, applying it to ministry. And here's one of the things that I found while in this kind of not intentional search, but like I found it, is that whenever you're in a disagreement or in a conflict with someone, and all of a sudden it seems like tensions rise up out of nowhere and they start freaking out on you, at least that's what it looks like on the outside, you want to take a big step back, take a breath, take a pause, because here's the thing, you want to reassure them and let them know, hey, this conflict isn't as important to me as you are important to me. And while I want to continue discussing this because I still disagree, but I can see that right now it's bothering you, and I want you to know that I care about you enough to pause this conflict to let you know that I love you. Because here's the thing, and this is what you see with a lot of therapy and counselors and stuff, is that they tell you that a lot of this time when people freak out or overreact out of nowhere, 99% of the time there's a reason why. And they actually attribute this to past experiences. Maybe they've had a situation in the past that looks eerily similar to the argument that you're having or the conflict that you're having. And what you can do is you can take a pause and be like, maybe there's something more going on here right now. Maybe it's more than what I can see with my eyes. And you can pray and ask God to give you discernment and wisdom to help diffuse the situation so that way then you can continue it with peace and love and truth. Remember, they are not the enemy. The enemy are the ones who plant the seeds of insecurity and brokenness and hurt that give birth to these fruits of outbursts of anger or fear or any other sorts of these things that we're quite frankly seeing a lot of today. And so we have to keep our minds focused. And so I want to start to bring this to my last perspective right here. We talked about us and the importance. And remember, others are our mission. We have a mission of hope to deliver to them. So ourselves, let's talk about ourselves real quick. And this is the last perspective that I have for us, is that when we truly understand the concept of God versus wickedness, it brings us to a sobering realization. And that is this: every single person has found themselves on the other side of this battle. Every single one of us at some point in our lives have been on the side of wickedness. And I want to give you a little more insight into, we talked about Israel with the whole thing with Assyria. Now, it's really easy to put Israel in a box and say, yeah, they just turned away from God, they were horrible people, and they were a godless nation. And that is how God describes them. But in their own eyes, see, what they often did is they tried to do both. They tried to serve other deities and serve God. They tried to mix their churches with other religions and other gods that were false gods, and they thought they could do both. They thought they could serve two masters. But here's the thing, Jesus tells us, you will love one master and hate the other. And so now we can be like, well, it talks about, in Deuteronomy, it says actually, God tells them explicitly, he tells them that his jealousy would burn hot against them and he would punish them if they take any other gods. So then we look at their actions and we're like, that's so dumb. Why are you doing this? God told you that you can't do this. You may think that you're able to, but you can't because God told you already. And we may think they're dumb, making terrible decisions. But let's take a step back once again and reflect on our own lives. How many of us at some point in our lives have tried to serve two masters? We thought that we could serve God but still be caught up in this thing of the past. We thought that we could serve God, but every once in a while still give into this one temptation right here. And all of a sudden, I think we come to the sobering realization that in our own hearts, we are a lot like Israel. And so I want to tell you this out of Romans 6:1 through 2 and 12 through 14. Well then, should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? Of course not. Since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? Do not let sin control the way you live. Do not give in to sinful desires. Do not let any part of your body become an instrument of evil to serve sin. Instead, give yourselves completely to God, for you were dead, but now you have new life. So use your whole body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of the Lord. I think sometimes we can go back to this old thing and this old sin, this old temptation, and we think that it's all okay and all fine because we always make sure that we ask for forgiveness after. Or maybe even worse, we get into this temptation and we've done it so many times and we've given into this sin so many times that we're numb and apathetic, and instead we're actually resistant to coming back to Christ for forgiveness. And I want to tell you, that's a very dangerous place to be. As a matter of fact, I would say as a Christian, it's the worst place to be. You are numbing your spirit to the guidance and the discernment and the nudging of the Holy Spirit. There is a great warning for that. There is a great, great warning for that, and you should take it very seriously, that when your heart turns away from God, that should be red alarms going off in your mind. Red alarms, the sirens, the whole works, like tornado warning or watch. All the sirens are going off. You should be alert at that moment when you realize that you are numb to the sin that you are in. That is a red alarm, red lights. So I want us to take a big step back to Joshua once again, and I want to reread it with all this stuff in mind. So let's rewind to Joshua 5:13 through 15, and see if we can understand a little bit more about this God versus wickedness perspective. See, when Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command." The commander of the Lord's, Joshua said, "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did as he was told. God is not on our side. We are on his side. And when we fully understand that and live our lives according to this, obedient and eager to serve the Lord, just like it said here in Joshua, Joshua did as he was told. It is my firm belief that in this perspective and heart posture that we find the best of our lives. And when I say best of our lives, I don't necessarily mean financial blessing, and I don't necessarily mean lavish living standards, but rather I mean that whenever you live obedient to God, letting him judge the wickedness and letting him take revenge and letting him work against the enemies, and you just stay on God's side and you say, "What do you command? What do you want me to do?" And then when he speaks, you do what he says. That is when you will find peace that surpasses all understanding and a hope that triumphs over any fear or situation that you may encounter. So, in just a moment, I want to pray. But before this, I want to let you know I'm going to be praying for wisdom, discernment, and hope and trusting God. But while I'm praying for over all of you, I want you in your own hearts to pray and ask the Holy Spirit to give you discernment and wisdom in your own heart and ask him to point out any wickedness that you may be dealing with. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier today. We all stumble. We all falter. We're just like Israel. We turn away from God. But here's the thing. God can help us. He can guide us along the right path and help us to choose him every step of the way if only we trust in him. So, as I pray, I want you in your own heart to ask God to help you to redeem the wickedness that you're dealing with. We are not meant to fix our sin and then come before God. We are meant to say, "God, I'm in trouble. I've messed up. I've sinned. I'm filthy. This thing has a grip on me. I need your help because you are the freedom. You are the one who breaks all chains. You are the one who loves me and gives me a hope that covers all of my needs." When you can pray this and mean it wholeheartedly, it says in the Bible that knock and the door shall be answered for you. That if you seek it, that you will find it. So I'm going to pray over all of you that God helps you and gives you wisdom to find this truth, but I want you to pray to God for yourself that he helps you personally. So let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, Lord, I just pray for wisdom over all of the people in this room and even beyond, Lord. Lord, I pray for your truth to reign supreme. I pray that we have a faith and a trust in the worthiness of your word, Lord. What you call good and evil, what you call right and wrong, what you call justice and sin. Help us to trust so that we no longer have to define it for ourselves, Lord, but instead we can just lean upon you and just ask the simple words, what do you want me to do, Lord? Not what this world wants us to do, not what I want to do, but Lord, what do you want? Because Lord, I know that you offer a good life. I know that you offer peace. I know that you offer love that covers all hurt and all pain, all insecurity and all brokenness. Your healing powers can fix anything, Lord, both on the outside and the inside. So I pray, Lord, that your hand would just touch every single person in this room so that they can hand it to you wholeheartedly and have their conscience relieved of the guilt of the sin that they are dealing with or have dealt with in the past, Lord. Let there be freedom in your name so that you may receive the glory, so that you may receive the recognition because you are the one who sets the captives free. Lord, as we go back into worship, I pray that by the power of your Holy Spirit, that we would be guided into a new understanding and a new perspective on how to see you, how to see others, and Lord, ultimately, how to see ourselves. Because it is out of a love for you and out of a trust of you that we learn to love ourselves. And out of that, we learn how to love those around us. So I pray for a whole new perspective. I pray for your help, Lord. You are the one who guides all truth. I pray this all in your mighty name. Amen.